I hope I don't say the same thing as I said 10 minutes ago. We'd like to thank, to begin with, we'd like to thank Beth Ellen Keyes, who is head of the program for all the panels for the SHOWBIZ Expo. And we'd like to thank Gerald Brandt. Gerald, through Variety, has his own publishing end. He has his own publication, which he runs, and we certainly wish him an awful lot of luck with that. He was very helpful for me and I'm sure all the other moderators for all the panels in just helping us get organized so we could be here with you today. We met not too long ago at the panel here to discuss exactly how we should approach this. Now, what we all agreed on, we had two basic things we did agree to, is that we wouldn't sit back here, which is so easy for most of us because we've been in this business sometimes we think too long, is sit back here and give you lots of war stories about our wonderful adventures we've had in the movie and the television industry. We won't do that. We'll maybe use a war story, a brief war story, just to emphasize a point. Something else we also basically agreed to was to not go to, let's say, in the case of Andrew, who is an expert in post-production, rather than going, well, you're an expert in post-production. Rather than taking a topic and giving it to each individual, we do the same thing we kind of just did in the panel before this on pre-production. We would make it more like a crossfire type of a panel discussion with about, in our case, maybe 8 to 11 topics. The key thing here is, in talking with these guys, we have similar experiences, but we don't always agree. And that's good, because that will get down to the fact that you can start seeing different people's point of view. One of the key areas we ran into is many times in the area of budgeting, a project, the difference is how much money is available. What I'd like to do at this time is, first of all, from you, so we have some idea of how to gauge our panel, is how many people work in the motion picture and television industry here? We are in a lot of trouble, Larry.
Yeah, I know.
Okay. Okay.
How many were just here?
Larry, you can't say the same things over again, can you? Okay.
I'll lie.
You'll lie? Okay, what I'd like to do is, let's start with Andrew over here. I'd like each panelist to introduce themselves to you and give us a brief history, background, and mainly brief because it's very tough to do a seminar on production or a panel discussion on production in an hour and 10 minutes, and leaving like 20 minutes for questions. I've done them in 3 days, I've done them in 5 days, I've never done them in an hour. So right now, as they guys all know me fairly well, is the fact that I'm the master of the run-on sentence. So believe me, you don't want that. So let me start out with Andrew first. Andrew?
Good morning. My name is Andrew Golov. I'm the Vice President of Physical Production for Spelling Films. I've been there about a year. My responsibilities at Spelling are basically the below-the-line production of our feature films. Responsibilities are budget, cost reports, hiring, staffing, crisis management. Before that, I was the president of Signet Sound Studios, a post-production sound facility, for 3 years. Prior to that, I was the head of post-production at Imagine Entertainment. I've worked as an associate producer in television. I've produced television series. And going way back to the very beginning when I first moved here, I was a production executive at NBC in the movies department. So it kind of gives you an overview. Basically, my career has evolved to the point where I drift from one studio executive job to another.
He can't hold down a job.
And actually, as one of the first executives I ever worked for explained to me, basically what I do is I interpret for the financial people and the corporate executives what it is that actually happens while we're making a movie. So I'm sort of a porthole.
That's good.
Through which information passes back and forth.
Thank you. Ira?
I've actually done a lot of, in a sort of narrow band, a lot of things, different things on a lot of different movies. My first feature I actually started out was a very low-budget movie. I had no experience. I was the production manager. It's about a $100,000 movie with about $700,000 of deferments. A financing method, which thankfully has gone the way of the Edsel. And subsequently, I became an AD trainee through the Directors Guild. In fact, one of the pictures that I did, Ralph was the first AD. And a lot of whatever organization I have, I owe to him and Udi Bennett, who was the second AD. Subsequently, I became a production manager after a brief career as a first, probably because I wasn't any good. And I did a series of TV movies for Robert Helmy, and then 4 or 5 features that would fall when we talk about what kind of movies we do or what kind of producers we do. I started to get a reputation as a producer for hire for what would be called low-budget movies in a certain context, which is to say a commercial studio context. They weren't all commercially successful. I'm talking about intention, not result. And then most recently, I was an executive at Interscope Communications, where, among other things, I did the job that Andrew described, supervising directly the physical production of the movies and also supervising the person who supervised the post-production.
That's great. Thank you, Ira. Donald?
My name is Donald Borchers. I'm the owner of Planet Productions Corp. It's an independent production company. We produce, finance, and distribute pictures primarily in the budget range of under $2 million, primarily made for video. Been doing that for the last 12 years. Before that, I was head of production at New World Pictures. Before that, I was head of production at Leisure Investment Corp. Before that, I was head of production at Sandy Howard Productions. And before that, I was my entry-level job was at AVCO Embassy Pictures after I graduated Notre Dame with a bachelor's in finance. And Larry Sugar. Larry?
Okay, I'll start the other way. I graduated USC Law School in '71. I spent approximately 8 years between Warner Brothers and Fox. I started my own company with my wife Bonnie called Serendipity. We sold that in 1981 to Lorimar. I became president of Lorimar International. I quit over a movie, took that movie and myself and a very unsatisfied wife who got kicked out of Lorimar because I left. I went to CBS. The movie was Kiss of the Spider Woman. CBS closed its theatrical. I went to the very quickly defunct Weintraub Screen Entertainment. I started my own company. I sold that again to, which was Sugar Entertainment, to Republic Pictures. Left Republic and became what I had for 25 years helped everybody else become a producer. Now I produce and write.
I'm Ralph Singleton. I'm your moderator for this panel on production. That's our subject. I started in New York about 27 years ago as a production assistant. Did a couple of films in New York, became a Directors Guild trainee like Ira, became an assistant director, a production manager, worked on films like Taxi Driver and Network, and TV series like Kojak, moved to California about 15 years ago, and over the last 15 years, I've had either feature films in my life like Clear and Present Danger, or a TV series like Cagney and Lacey. My basic approach has always been from the independent standpoint, but the difference between me and most of the panelists, not all, is the fact that I found myself in working for the major studios, and most of those events are as a line producer. So that's kind of the history behind me. I joined the Writers Guild of America years ago in New York, and I'm a member of the Directors Guild of America. And what we'd like to do, if we could, is that write down your questions as we go through this. Hold your question to the end, and we'll definitely find time for questions. The thing would also that Larry did on his panel earlier is the fact, stop us if we hit a term that you don't know, because it doesn't do you any good if you can't follow it, because the truth is, there's some of the terms, there's a term today that I heard that I didn't know, and I've been in the business a long time. So, in any case, I'm not going to tell you. I'll never. I will never tell Larry. Anyway, I looked at the brochure that all of you guys got, and we got into exactly what this panel was about. It said, oh, you'll talk about scheduling, and you'll talk about budgeting, and you'll talk about paperwork, and you'll talk about computers, and you talk about dealing with unions. Well, again, as I said earlier, I can do that in 3 days. I don't know how I'm going to do it in an hour. So we picked about 11 topics. And they'll all interrelate because it's all part of production. And we'll kind of talk about them. The first subject we'll come across is scheduling. Who wants to try scheduling? What is it?
You're the expert.
Yes, but you wrote
I wrote a book.
The book.
Thank you.
Excuse me, a very good book, by the way. End of plug.
Well, thank you. I wrote a book on scheduling. The problem you run into in this business, and it's really something to take to heart, and I don't care how many years you've been in this business or what position you're in. I don't care if you're the chairman of the board of a major company. People always cut right to the bottom line, and they say, how much would this picture cost? They don't want to do the work. The truth is, what you have to do is you have to schedule it. And what is scheduling? It's simply taking a screenplay. Usually what happens to me is I will go to a studio, they'll hand me a script. There will be no scene numbers on it. There will be page numbers, usually between 110 and 120 pages. What I will do with that script is I'll read it, I'll put the scene numbers in it, then I'll take the scenes, break it out into each element, be it the fact that there's an actor in that particular scene, or a prop, or then where the scene takes place, an interior or exterior, or day or night, and I'll go through and I'll analyze it. I'll put this on a flow chart called a production board. After I put this on a production board, I'll evaluate the number of days it will take to make this project, be it television or feature film, how many days that will take. That's basically what scheduling is about. Scheduling is about time. And then the next step, you get the budget, it's about money. So basically that to me is what scheduling is about. Any comment? Anybody ever
Well,
what do you think?
one, if we were to discuss scheduling as a technical issue and go through it in depth, it's a 2-day seminar, which is, actually, I made it as a joke, but actually, buying Ralph's book, which goes through it in great detail, is very useful in getting an overview of how scheduling for movies is done and what the elements are. But beyond that, in a kind of wider thing, the schedule for TV movie, let's take the same abstract script that one of you, say, wrote. If you gave it to Ralph to budget as a star-driven Warner Brothers movie, it will come out at around 60 days, somehow mysteriously. If you gave it to me to budget, as a television movie, say, it would come out at about 18 to 20 days. If you gave it to Donald to do as one of his movies, it would come out as...
How many days, Donald?
15 to 30.
But the point being that the budget and the context in which the movie is made actually deals a lot with the schedule, which is often, if you go and you do a schedule, a lot of times the studio, they tell you what they want it to come out, which has nothing to do with their analysis of the material, it has to do with what the context is.
If you're doing a movie that is in the $30 to $40 million range for feature, you're going to come out at a roughly, boy, I'm going to kill myself by doing this, in the low 50s as far as number of shooting days. It's a formula. You're basically taking labor costs. But remember, in a case of a feature film for a studio, dealing with IA costs, dealing with union costs because the studios have a contract with the union. In the case of Donald, what would you do, Donald?
Well, the variables that are important to us when we're under $2 million is, for instance, if we rent a piece of equipment, we can negotiate a rate on a daily rental to apply for a week. So if something costs so much per day, we can say, okay, let's redefine a week to be 1 day per week. So if we've rented something for a day, we own it for 7 days. So we look at questions like, should we shoot 5 days a week or 6 days a week? So we shoot 6 days a week because it doesn't cost extra for the equipment, because we're very value conscious. The second thing we look at very hard is how many times we have to literally move the company from A to B, because being economically challenged, we have to make sure that we don't overspend the money. So when we look at transportation as it affects scheduling, we never hire a truck or a driver run a picture. We hire them on the days we move. So we look at an interior schedule then and say, the most important thing to us is how many times are we going to move during the shoot? And then when we location scout for the schedule, we say, how many locations can we get out of this location? How many sets can it be in our movie? Because it's much easier to move the equipment around there than it is to keep moving equipment from place to place. And our cardinal rule regarding moves is that we would never move during a shooting day. Just would never consider it. And these are the biggest factors to us.
It's absolutely true, because what you'll run into is someone asked me, well, when you're doing lower budget movies, I guess you don't have to schedule that much. The truth is, it's just the opposite. The fact is, you've got to be much more intense when you have less money, because, I deal with larger budgets. I'm very conscious of the money. I certainly try to be at all times. But if you're dealing with a budget like, say, Donald's at, your range is from what, $600,000 to
$2 million.
$2 million. Those are the movies he makes, and he makes a lot of movies in this range. He's not going to sit down and worry about where, in my case, Wesley Snipes' trailer is going to be, because Wesley Snipes more than likely won't be there, therefore there's no need for the trailer. That's right. But, yeah, I mean, right now in the situation with Andrew, if you're dealing with post-production involved in a smaller project, like the spelling things, you're dealing with, what, television as well as movies?
No, I'm just in the feature film department. For me, scheduling, it totally interrelates to the budget. And as we consider how we're going to go about making a picture, we always discuss how big the box is going to be. And the box, the size of the box always starts with how many days do you need to shoot this movie. If you ask me, it's always less days because I know that that's going to reduce the budget. If you ask the director, it's always more days. So from my point of view, the job that I do, right away there's a conflict. I continually find myself in meetings saying to the director, if you just took this day and this day, you could get all this work done in one day. And he or she always has 5 reasons why they can't. Usually, at some point, they bring up the word art.
Creative differences.
The other issue for me, and again, it goes back to budget, is I'm rarely concerned with what I do with company moves or how many things need to happen in a day in terms of cranes or actors. I always look at the schedule, again, in terms of the budget, because the first question that I ask is, what does each day cost? And then I can start to define, no matter what they tell me, they always want to make the picture for less. If they say it's 20 million, then it's really 18. And I always end up, so it really works against what Donald was talking about, which is, a smaller budget is harder to work with because it's always a smaller budget. The people that are making the movie want to put more into the box than we want to put into it.
Meaning from the studio's point of view, in this case, Spelling's point of view, or any production company. The fact is, you're running into a situation where they do cut the number down because in many cases, I would say they also figure you're going to float up anyway.
Exactly.
And they're trying to protect themselves.
Right.
And what you find we'll get into budgeting next, but you'll find that when you're dealing with a major studio, there is no contingency of 10%, whereas in independents there is. Well, if you don't have it, they're going to build it in themselves, thinking you're going to go over, cut it back.
No, we know you're going to go over. It's a given. It's a given that no matter how many days are in the schedule, 3 to 5 more days will be required to finish the picture.
But then it gets into scheduling. It's based on something that if you're dealing with a feature film, say 110 to 120 pages, you're looking at a situation where if I'm doing Cagney and Lacey, the director, in this case, unfortunately, almost like a traffic cop, has to do between 7 and 8 pages of material a day. In the case of a movie of the week, how many pages a day do you have to do?
3 to
5.
6.
Yeah, 6, 7.
Okay, in the situation of a feature film, when I started the business in '69, the average schedule for movies like The French Connection and Taxi Driver and whatever was 40 days. It is now, the average is, as Ira said, is 60 days, which means a feature film director is expected to turn out a little more than 2 pages a day. Now, it could be, as Ira said, the same script. It's a question of money and time, because that's the big difference between a major film like Eraser, that cost $1 gazillion, compared to something that Donald would do, right? Okay.
I want to come back to something Donald said, which is a good way of illustrating differences also between the films. When you're scheduling, depending on the context, there are different rules. Donald will get into the question of whether you should work 5 or 6 days, because you basically bought your core equipment for a week. And when I worked with Larry Cohn, we almost without exception worked 6-day weeks until he, or we burned out. And sometimes 7-day weeks, because the equipment was a large factor. When you get above a number, which I've never figured out, which is probably somewhere between $3 and $10 million, the equipment becomes a negligible factor, and it becomes a labor-intensive rather than capital-intensive, by which I mean you don't pay as much for things as you do for the people that do the work. And yet, when I would do a $10, $12, $13 million movie, we would schedule around the availability of the crane. You know, we try to put our 3 crane shots together, so we wouldn't have to bring the crane in, because that was a lot of money. Or and everybody knows what a crane is, right? So, or a Musco light, which is a very big, very expensive light that you typically use to make night on exteriors. So you would try to put those days together. Now, on a larger movie with a lot of other factors, let's say a $50 million movie, you certainly wouldn't put the 2 Musco scenes together, because there are other parameters which might be more important, which might be, say, the availability of actors.
It's true, and what happens to you then is you kind of go right into what happens with the budget, and that's your next basic category here, because you cannot separate the creative from the production on a film, not really, not clearly, and you cannot separate the schedule from the budget. So basically on the budget, we were talking the other day about this, and it's interesting to find out what determines a budget. Larry?
Well, we talked about this a little earlier this morning. It's my opinion that a budget is determined by only 2 things. If you've done it independently, how much money you've raised. If you're doing it for a studio, how much they'll give you. And you work backwards.
It's true. I mean, one of the major influences you have is...
But you don't want to say that to them.
No.
If you say that to them, they'll deny it and they'll get angry.
Deny what? You never said anything. I heard nothing. You have a movie that has a star in it. What happens? Movie goes up every time. Because you suddenly realize that in 1970, the budgets we used to work with was $2 below the line to $1 above the line. Now it's $2 above the line and $1 below the line.
Moving quickly towards $3 above the line and $1 below the line.
It's true. John Sayles said recently in an interview that I saw that it's a miracle to even make a motion picture, because he was being questioned as to, wouldn't you rather be doing these $50 million films? He says, listen, truthfully, the person who's doing the $50 million film, and some of the films around my world, is they really only have really $12 million to make these big budget films. The physical cost, the cameras, the film, the trailers, the rest of it's going someplace else. Above the line, covering your cast, covering your writer, covering your director, covering your producer's area. That's where that big chunk of money is going. Okay, any comments about?
Yeah, that relates to our business. At Planet Productions Corp., we fall into that group that we could just do a budget and finance our own movie. We're very concerned that we don't want to lose any money. So what we do is we go around to all the distributors that we think we would sell the film to when it's done, and we ask them for 2 numbers. What's the worst you could do if this movie stiffs? And what would you probably do if it's what I'm telling you I'm going to make? And then the way we cut the deal is we make it for the stiff price. That way, worst thing that happens, everybody made money. Everybody got paid while they were working. The distributor paid us on delivery. We got our money back, and the distributor can sell it under the worst case scenario. And then what we do is we cut the distribution deal, so if it hits the probable case, we can make more money.
And what really leads you down the road from the scheduling and budgeting situation? I didn't stutter before I got here. Not very really. Is again going back to the olden days. That was about 7 years ago. We traditionally would make a schedule by taking something called a strip board, and we would take pieces of cardboard, little strips, and we'd make our little boards. Most of the people who are coming up in the ranks, the people who are out there working as assistant directors and production managers, use a computer. The computer is here, it's very real, and some of the people out there that I know, with few exceptions, there are few out there, are kicking and screaming into the computer world. So in true reality, if you don't have the computer skills, if you don't get out there and find out what the software is available for scheduling and budgeting, you should. Because the truth is, what happens to you in dealing with a computer is that you can do it faster at the top when you do it by hand, but when you are finished, you don't have all those lists. You have to go back and do those too. So, anyone here?
We find,
I probably did.
We find what the computers allow us to do is there are always scenarios in terms of, well, how are we going to make this movie? If we shoot it all on location, or are we going to build some sets and shoot some on location? And what the computers allow us to do, especially with budgets, is say, okay, let's not shoot this whole thing in London. Let's shoot only the exteriors in London, and then bring the rest of the picture back to North Carolina and build the 3 main sets in North Carolina. And once we've plugged in the days and the crew, it's very easy to say to the production accountant, all right, just take all this labor for construction and drop the crew and put these last 20 days into North Carolina, what's that going to cost? And you can know that stuff in a matter of hours, so that I can come in at 8 o'clock in the morning, work with an accountant till lunchtime, and be in my boss's office at 2 o'clock in the afternoon with 3 different budgets. Mark them all up, and at the end of the day, come back and say, all right, this is how we're going to make the movie. Because we're always constantly backing into a number. We don't budget the picture based on what it's going to take to really make the movie. We budget the picture based on the amount of money available to us to make the picture. And there's always a discrepancy.
Yes. Donald, do you back into a number?
Absolutely. It's the only way we do budgets. The people say, how much does the script cost? And I say, what do you want to buy it from me for? And then it's a value-added business. We have to figure out how to put the value in it to make it worth the number that we're representing.
The other thing I'm sorry, Larry. The other thing that always influences budget, and we just touched on this briefly, is who's in the movie. And it's sort of the Ronald Reagan trickle-down theory. If you have a $10 million actor in the movie...
Well, one that works.
If you have a $10 million actor in a movie or a $15 million actor in a movie, every single person on the crew expects to live their life in proportion to the star of the picture. So if you have a $2 million actor, you can get away with paying scale to everybody. But once you have a megastar in the picture, then the assistant craft service person expects to be $4 over scale. And that's why budgets blow up. So we're always in that position of, well, the picture's like $25 million above the line, and it's the same $6 million below the line.
And that's true at every market level. They're all cast-driven pictures. TV movies, independent videos, low-budget features, they're all cast-driven. If we represent that we're going to make a movie for $900,000, the first question from our distributor is, how much for cast? And out of 900, they would want to see $250,000. I mean, it's no small number. It's your biggest budgeting factor.
And the least controllable number, interestingly enough.
Well, because you don't get to negotiate that.
There's one other thing. It was sort of giving, I think, the notion that movies are actually made for what they're worth, which I would say, because the composition of the panel is not really, is maybe 30% of the time in reality. And part of the reason in movies, as opposed to in movies that are made by larger companies, is that they're venturing. In other words, they're not selling off the rights for an X. They're basically holding the rights in order to maximize their profits. Now, it is very calculable what the movie is worth, based on who's in it, what kind of material it is, and so forth. And so you have kind of a dialectic between what the movie is theoretically worth and, as a venturer, what you're really willing to spend. And within the studio, you have different voices. To make up an example, the director of this movie is somebody they want to be in business with, and this is somebody who has a vision of his or her art. And if you get into a situation like that, that movie may be allowed willingly to cost several $1 million more than it could otherwise, literally based on that relationship. So a lot of kind of weird dynamics within studio movies that aren't as absolute. I mean, when Larry makes a movie, when Donald makes a movie, there really aren't a lot of people involved in deciding what that movie's going to cost.
That's true. They have control of the elements.
In a studio, there's a lot more very kind of hot dynamics coming from a lot of different places about what the movie may cost.
I wanted to make one comment with regard to those of you who have no interest in becoming line producers, but think of yourselves as creative producers, or that's the career you want to follow. I think you make a tragic mistake if you don't fully understand everything a line producer does. I don't understand how you can have any control on your end product unless you know what's going to be allocated where, how a line producer can shift things around. You don't want to just rely on your line producer saying, hey, you have enough money for 200 extras today, and you as a creative producer think, gee, I saw 1,000. Well, you might have that money. You better get into the budget and understand it and question your line producer, or if you don't have your line producer, your production manager, your unit production manager, but you certainly better understand that.
No, he's right, because what happens is you have a bottom line, And what happens to that bottom line, for a line producer, the only money you have control of is the below-the-line costs. You don't control post, not for a studio. And you don't control the above-the-line, although you watch all the numbers. In other words, you don't let the above-the-line costs, people around the stars, get out of control to such a point that it begins to cost the picture more money, because it will. The thing that you're constantly doing, Donald's doing, or Andrew's doing, or any of us are doing, is that we are constantly shifting the money around. We're floating the money from one place to another. Yes, it's true, the director will say, I have 1,000, I thought I saw 1,000 extras, and you had 75. You use your first assistant director, who's working with that director, to move those extras around. You're constantly doing this, because that's how you stay within a number, within a category. Now, back on the situation from computers. The deal with computers really is, they're basically two systems we all know. There's the IBM system that's out there, and there's the manufacturer, and there's Macintosh. The deal with both of these companies is they're both very good. The key thing is that, as I understand it, I use Macintosh because it's more user-friendly, and I need all the friends I can get when it comes to working with a computer. So, in looking and evaluating all the various software that's out there today, I would have to say that I would guess, and someone correct me, but I think at least 85, 95% of the market right now is controlled by Movie Magic, or owned by Screenplay Systems.
For scheduling and budgeting.
Yeah.
For formatting scripts, which they have a program for, I would say they're far less dominated. There are about 3 or 4 of those. And we do use those in making movies, not just writing scripts, because movies are, in almost every venue, I think, you go through script changes, you put out new pages. There's a very rigid format for doing that. It's easier to do, assuming that the staff that's doing it really understands the program, which has been a problem over the last 5 years. But it's easier to do with a computer program that's dedicated to that rather than just in Word.
Well, I would think Movie Magic, in terms of scripts, is the least used.
I agree with that. I was
Scripter,
being polite, Larry.
Scripter and Final Draft would be the most.
No, Scripter is a Screenplay
Excuse me,
Systems.
Final Draft would be the most.
Final Draft did. And to what Ralph said, my experience, which is limited to whatever I've seen, is that about 70% of the computers used for non-accounting purposes tend to be Macs still.
Yeah, the script writing program in Screenplay Systems, it has one and only one advantage, and it's nominal in nature. You can library the names of your actors and the names of your locations, and then you can export them. It's something that if you were to type it yourself, you're saving about 15 minutes of work.
Now you have a schedule, you have a budget. Now you have to get down to crewing this picture.
I want to recommend one other
Sure.
type of program. If you are going to work with numbers at all, you probably want to learn Excel or something similar to that, because not every scenario, not everything that you examine fits quickly and easily into a budgeting program, which is, after all, for budgeting the whole movie. So unless you want to be working on an envelope, which you don't, you probably want to be able to use that kind of program.
That's good. So we're in the same boat. What do we all have to do up here? What you have to do is you have to select a crew. All right? How do we select a crew? Ira, how would you select it?
Well, when I work particularly as a producer for hire, again, I keep coming back to this question of context, but I think, you want to be sensitive to what the movie is and what the context is. If you're making a TV movie, you want to hire a TV movie crew that has experience at that. Ralph told me once that the director and the lead actor set the tone of the set. And that may be extremely significant in terms of who you hire. For example, you may know a prop man who's meticulous and very, very good, which is very, very detailed, which is important in that category. But he's kind of like a little grouchy. You might be working, as I was, with Peter Weir, and you know that won't fly. A lot of the movies I did, one of the things that I semi-pioneered was working regionally. So, are you going to hire this particular person or that particular person regionally, or are you going to bring them from Los Angeles or New York or Chicago or Atlanta?
But let me ask you a question, though. Larry, you're in a situation where you're doing projects with Showtime. Do you have a choice in that regard?
I certainly have a choice as to who I can hire, as long as they're Canadian. So I'm certainly limited. I want to actually, just before we get into that,
Sure.
to say that I think, at least for my films, I'm interested, Don, to see if you feel the same way. It's not my director and my actor who set the tone of the set, but rather my director and maybe even more importantly, my first AD, in terms of the crew. And I find that the most important choice I make in terms of how the days are going to be and how people are going to get along is my first AD.
Well, Ralph, when he told me that was the first AD, so I assume he was being modest.
Being modest.
I was being very modest at the time.
For me, I hold it to the director. I feel that the primary responsibility of the director is to run the set. And it starts there, it stops there, and I put it on one person.
Well, no, I'm not talking about who the responsibility is on. Just in terms of the tone of the crew. The director gives the instructions to the first AD sets the tone with the crew.
Well, a good point would be generally the director picks the first AD, so it's an expression of his or her personality.
And
Yeah,
they can
'cause-
make adjustments.
Yeah, because contractually, with the Directors Guild contract, the director has the contractual right to select the first AD. If you can't make the deal, then you can have him make another change. But it is within his domain to make the choice of who the first assistant director is going to be. In the case of the director I'm working with right now, an American, he was leaning toward an American. This picture I'm doing is in Canada. There's a conflict between the DGC and the DGA. There have been 4 American assistant directors allowed in Canada in the last 2 years. The minimum requirement is you have done 3 pictures with that director as the first AD to even be allowed in the country. There's a conflict between those 2 guilds. You always have to look into that situation if you're working outside the United States.
From my point of view, I don't get down into the below-the-line crew. What I try to do is hire or approve a line producer who is going to be my partner, because he's my first line of communication. I don't go to the set. We shoot movies all around the world. It's almost impossible for me to travel and have any kind of control. So it starts with the line producer, and really there's only 4 other jobs that I personally have to be responsible for at Spelling. It's the director of photography, the production designer, 3, and the editor. Those are the 3 jobs that I have to spend a good deal of time, once we know we're making a movie, researching who the producers, the creative producers, want to hire, making sure that the line producer has a good working relationship with those people, and also spending a fair amount of time talking to guys like these who have worked with those people before to find out what's going on in those people's lives. You know, often you find that a guy who has a list of credits as long as his arm is having some kind of a personal problem. And you don't want him on your movie until his crisis is over.
It's very true.
We do a little detective work before we...
Sometimes that doesn't work. I had a picture where the only time I've ever fired an AD, and the guy arrived on distant location and announced he'd just been divorced earlier in the day. It was not good, and he was fired less than halfway through.
In our context, again, being independent and not having to seek studio approvals, we have two requirements that haven't been discussed yet. It's the most important thing to us, is after we feel that we're honing in on the right person, we check not 1, not 2, but 3 references on them. And listening is a skill in Hollywood that's undervalued. When you check a reference, no one will ever volunteer a negative thing. So what we listen for is the absence of them volunteering positive things.
Actually,
how are they? Oh, they're very good. Okay, they responded to an inquiry. They didn't go on to say, in fact, they're so good that, and then they fill in the blanks on their own. So what we're looking for in a reference is if the other party initiates a good word. And that's how we check it. And we want to hear from 3, because if we can get 3 good references on someone, they're either the greatest people person you've ever met, because somebody's lying through their teeth for them, and that's worth having them around.
It's very, very, very true.
The second thing that I interview everyone who works on our shows, if it's the craft service person, the key grip, the composer, I make them answer one very simple question. Why would you be happy to take this job under these terms? And if I can't determine an answer, we don't make the deal, because we know right there it's going to be one of those situations we're trying to sidestep.
I don't even get to ask that question.
Well, that's a question you ask when
But
you're
that's a
doing
function. Your line producer.
No, that's absolutely
yes.
true.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I keep cutting Larry off. The one thing that I do with I don't often even care. I mean, I do obviously listen when people. The thing that I key off of is how quickly they call back. If I leave a message for somebody saying so and so is going to be a DP in our picture, and if the producer calls me back in the next 2 hours, you can be sure that he had a great relationship with this guy.
That's true.
If he waits till the next day, he's spent the day. If he's been legitimately busy or out of town, that's fine. But often they're in their office, they just can't figure out what to say to you when they call back, and that they don't have to say anything at that point.
Yeah, a lot of this stuff will come back to you. I mean, no matter how careful or so, people are very hesitant, particularly if they don't know you. Mm-hmm. I mean, this would be somebody that I know slightly well telling me not to hire somebody in a way. So how is he? He's good. How's your wife? Well, I mean, what does that tell you?
And it tells you all, because therefore they don't want to volunteer the information. So the best thing to do is continue to ask more people about that individual.
Well, I tend to quiz them because I'm relentless. But
well, you are. He's an interrogator.
Yeah.
So you're going to hire a crew. Okay, you've hired a crew. One of the key things about hiring a crew is, all right, let's say in some case you're doing, let's say in this case, on this side of the table, you're doing a union film. On this side of the table, you're doing a non-union film. The fact is, unions exist. All right? You're now going to have to make a deal with those unions, and there are lots of them. So, Larry, let's talk about different types of unions.
Different types of unions? Well,
yes, here or Canada.
There are guilds and unions that you have to deal with. Everything from, I'll start with Canada, what I'm dealing with now in Vancouver. There are basically 3 unions that the crews come from. One that's really solely television, so on my films I'm not dealing with. On the feature films, there's 2, IA, which also exists, of course, in the United States, and the ACFC, which is really limited now under something called Section 41, which the government got involved with, to films that are $6 million below the line and under. So if it's above $6 million below the line, labor cost only below the line, then you can use either one. If it's above, you have to go IA. The point I'm making by using that as an illustration is there's like so much crap you have to deal with. There's so many details with these unions and guilds, and I think the benefit is when you are doing a union film is that you have choices, and choices are always good. A one-union town is you basically don't negotiate with. You have to make the decision of either doing union or non-union. And sometimes you don't have that choice. When I'm doing a Showtime film, for example, I don't have the choice of going non-union. When I'm doing my own film, which maybe I've raised the financing for on an independent basis, then I can do non-union. I can do whatever I want. Certainly in my experience, the most problems arise with, I wonder if I should say this, well, I will anyway, with the Teamsters. And I think that every producer, every line producer's nightmare is the Teamster negotiation. You guys want to comment?
You're doing just fine.
They don't want to admit that they have problems.
No, the situation though, but something's interesting about this. You're talking about Canada, in Vancouver, in Toronto. I'm not dealing with Teamsters. I'm dealing with drivers. They're a member of the IA. Difference. They don't want the Teamsters. The Teamsters have been trying to organize Toronto forever, and they haven't. Yet I came out of New York, dealing with the whole guys in New York, the Teamsters there, and various places in the United States that all have worked in. You'll find a very strong Teamster influence in many, many places. The right to work state, question it. Depends on the strength of the union in the given area. You think you're going to go to Georgia and you're going to shoot non-union? Try to find a crew. So therefore, you're dealing with realities.
The right to work laws are really not meaningful, except that they express a labor environment.
That's right.
I'm sorry. I want to borrow a little from what Don said before in terms of he wasn't talking about unions, but I kind of do the same thing in terms of references. There are certain guidelines that all the unions will give you. They exist, and those are just guidelines. You negotiate your own agreement as creative producer. If you don't find out what the line producer, what the parameters are that he or she has to negotiate with, you're a fool. The way you find that out is talking to other producers, and most of them will tell you what the kinds of deals that they've made in the past are, and what what the possible deals are for you. They don't want them, they want you to negotiate in an informed marketplace. If you make a deal with the IA in Vancouver or in LA that is so much richer on a $5 million, on a $2 million film,
Your colleagues will be hearing about it for 3 years.
That's right. You're killing everybody. They want to help you. And you want to go out, if you're uninformed about the details of that, and find out from producers.
Long Kiss Goodnight went to Toronto. They made very rich deals. I'm in Toronto. I'm paying for those deals. The truth is, I've got a very, very knowledgeable production manager who also works as a producer in Toronto, who knows all the necessary people, particularly in the unions, and we don't have to necessarily be beaten up by someone's bad judgment. But that's not necessarily the case. You follow in. If a location department does a bad job in the picture before you, you will pay for that because they don't trust the film companies. What happens with all films, with few exceptions?
Can I jump in on
Sure, go ahead.
For our context, again, under $2 million, our relationship with the Screen Actors Guild is very valuable. We're an absolute signatory. Because most independent films can end up being graded on the value of their cast, I don't know how you could actually make a film without a Screen Actors Guild relationship. They do have a special product for very, very small filmmakers. They have a festival contract that you can sign where you can defer the principal amount of the compensation of the actors until after your film acquires its distribution. So you can make deals even if you don't have any money. As an example, our company is signed to the Screen Actors Guild. We went to the Directors Guild and we sat down with them and said, we know that you're running 65% unemployed. This is not a secret. We know that there's people that would work underneath their rate to come onto our shows. And we don't think it's fair that they have to hide and shame and change their names. So we met with them and we made our own agreement. With the Directors Guild, we don't sit with the AMPTP and take agreements that are standard prepared, as we must with SAG, because SAG is the most powerful union because they control the strongest elements. So, for instance, you can meet with the Directors Guild and you can make any deal you want with them. Our deal, for instance, says that if we make a movie under $2 million, we can hire anybody we want, regardless of a roster. We can pay them whatever we want, regardless of a rate card. But what we can't do is mess around with the health, welfare, and pension system. And I think that's very reasonable. We took this contract over to the IA and the Teamsters and met with them and asked them if they would match it. And they immediately said, well, it's probably a good idea, but the guy who puts it through is never going to get reelected as a business manager in the IA or the Teamsters. So in fact, we don't have a problem with our company with the Teamsters. They run from us when we start shooting because they're afraid we're going to sit down and make a deal with them that they can't live with. With the Writers Guild, what we did was we formed two companies, a parent company and a subsidiary company. The parent company is not a signatory of the Writers Guild, so we can work with anybody we want. The subsidiary company only exists as a signatory to the Writers Guild. So when we find that one good script that we need to buy, we can respect their contract and buy it, because the Writers Guild also won't negotiate.
The good thing about this is it shows the fact that the unions and guilds, to a degree, are flexible. The fact is you had to find out how flexible, you have to get a history. What we talked about in an earlier panel today was the fact that you have to do your homework. You have to do homework with the unions, you have to do the homework with other pictures that have been in the area. I researched the pictures that have been in Washington, D.C. before I would go to Washington, so I'd have a history, not just for labor or for crewing or locations. For everything they did, I want to know about, so I won't either make the same mistakes they did or at least benefit from what they learned from their experience there. But what happens now with a film is that once you have got your film together and you've crewed it and the rest of it, before you can even go forward, you've got to have a completion bond. Now, there are some who don't have completion bonds. All right, let's throw it out. Larry, why would you have a completion bond?
Well, you have a completion bond. Anybody who doesn't know what a completion bond is? Okay. It's an insurance policy to guarantee the completion of a film. If you've gone over the allotted budget, the insurance policy comes into effect. They will take over the film and either complete it or close it down. Okay? And it's a protection for whoever's financed the film, that they'll either get their money back or a completed film. It depends on who you're dealing with and what budget level you're with. There are a lot of companies like Showtime, like HBO, in some instances, I guess, I would assume Planet, who decide that it doesn't make sense to pay a 3% fee to have at least a 3% fee for the completion bond, to have a required 10% contingency fund and to have somebody else interfere, and so they become self-insurers. Showtime has a procedure which scared the death out of me at the beginning, because my fee was, they don't use bonds, and instead my entire fee, or 90% of it, was at risk if I went over budget through any fault of my own.
HBO
does the
also.
same, I think, yeah. So what that means is, if they agree to something that raises your budget, or if there's force majeure, an act of God, that raises your budget, then your fee is not at risk. For anything else, it is. I think that makes better films and better producers. I think that puts me in the same position Don is on his film. I become a self-insurer. I like that.
And what that leads us to is controlling the project.
Yeah,
let's talk about controlling. Let's talk about controlling.
Let me just add the last sentence.
Yeah.
That's what I like about it, is that nobody, Showtime's may be fully financing, actually they aren't on the new ones, but in the past they were fully financing certain films of mine, and they can't tell me anymore, no, you can't have that crane, because I can say, hey, I'm going to pay for it. I'll do what I want. And I like having that choice.
Banks are lenders of money, not risk takers. In fact, the way you look at banking per se is to say that from the time you take money from a bank until the time you give it back to the bank, from their point of view, the only difference is time itself. They don't feel that they're ever taking any risks whatsoever. So as soon as you're doing a negative pickup or a piecemealing of rights and you need to go to a bank, you're always going to be in the bond business. Because they take no risk, they want the insurance that the picture will either be completed or their money will be paid back.
Shareholder business.
It's very, very true. Then it gets down to really what our relationship is with the film as far as responsibility. I think you'll find out, starting with Don, about your responsibility to that picture. I mean, it's at the next page.
Yeah, that's okay.
The lower the budget you'll see is the more responsibility you have, particularly in a non-union film. You're not relying upon a major conglomerate, like, let's say, Paramount, to bail you out. Situation is all on him.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm answering to a lot of executives.
Just talk.
He's answering to himself. Well, go ahead. I was just trying to turn him up.
I actually went to business school and studied and got my degree in business. And what they taught us in business school is that responsibility on the one hand and authority on the other hand are always coupled. And you can't separate them. As an independent, I know this to be true. I know if I put my money out there, I have the authority to do whatever I want with it, and I'm responsible for the actions. I'm always amused when I talk to the people who work at the studios, because here they become responsible for the money and they're given no authority to make any of the decisions. It cracks me up.
I want to add something to that. One second before you respond. I'll do a quick step.
Limited authority.
It isn't true. Ralph is absolutely correct in terms of once you go to the big budget films, you don't have the same amount of responsibility. But I don't want you to think that means that you can't have an equal amount of responsibility on an independent film that could be $20 million. Ralph's talking the $40 million and above. Highly unlikely that you'll have the same level of responsibility. But if you have piecemealed through domestic negative pickup, through pre-sales internationally, a $20, $25 million film, you still have creative responsibility. I mean, we certainly had it on with Paramount when Ralph and I did a $12 million film together, and when we did that, Paramount had a negative pickup for domestic. They had a lot to say, but we didn't have to listen to them. We were not contractually required to listen to them at all. We had to deliver a film that was 95 to 110 minutes in color, 35 millimeter, and every other requirement was spelled out. It had to say Stephen King's name on it. He had to direct it, etc. But that's it. We made our movie.
True. It's absolutely true. But the situation you got, as far as dealing with the spelling situation, as far as responsibility, how far can you really go?
Well,
dealing with the companies you've now given the money to.
it's a lot. I mean, it almost frequently boils down to reporting the bad news.
Yes.
Whereas these guys have, something at risk. The thing that's really at risk for me is my job. The more
Good as your last picture.
Yeah, I mean, if I get into a situation where every movie we do, one after another, keeps going over budget, pretty soon they're going to come back and say, well, what is this guy doing all day long? A studio or a corporation that makes movies is set up so that there's a team of people that are constantly analyzing and reanalyzing, the day-to-day process of making the movie. And what we try to do is predict when things are going to get so far off the track that we have trouble recovering. So we are always a union picture because of our profile. We bond almost all of our movies. In fact, I don't think there's been one in the last year and a half that we haven't. And because we also co-finance pictures, the bond company fits in to that place where when there could potentially be a conflict between the partners that are funding the picture, they're there to step in and help control that. But it goes back again to the line producer. That is my point of control.
Yeah, but Andrew, let me ask you a question, because we talked about this a couple of days ago, and that gets down to something, because we've kind of stayed away from paperwork on purpose, because that will really grind it too long. Is the situation is you got a hot sheet? Tell them about a hot sheet and what's on a hot sheet, how you use it. Because we all use something like that.
Hot cost report. I get a number of pieces of paper by fax every morning. I get a call sheet for the next day's work. I get a production report that is handwritten and signed by the unit production manager that tells me exactly what took place that day. And I also get a hot cost sheet. The hot cost sheet breaks out all the variables in the budget. How many extras we used that day, how much film was shot that day, how much overtime there was that day, how many meal penalties there were, who got bumps. In other words, the second camera assistant, because they decided in the afternoon to shoot with 2 cameras, became the first camera assistant on the B camera team, so he has to get more money for that day. What the hot cost sheet does is takes the production report, which if I had an hour in the morning, I could sit with my calculator and figure all that out. It tells me, okay, my day cost for a movie is $100,000. That's what pays the crew, rents the equipment, feeds the crew, gets us the location, rents the trucks, all that kind of stuff. Now here's all the other items that we didn't count on but that we did budget for. Of our pool of how much we were going to spend on extras, we used this amount. Of our overtime pool, we went 2 hours over and the cost impact was X. One of the things that I chart every day is how much film was shot on the set. Because film in its raw stock cost is not cheap. But it also tracks through into post-production because for every foot that was shot, it has to be developed, it has to be cut, it has to be printed, or in the case of an electronically cut show, it has to be transferred. So it's not just that the director was budgeted for 5,000 feet a day and he's shooting 6,000 feet a day. It's going to take the editor longer to sync the film, it's going to take everybody longer to look at it, and everybody's on overtime. As soon as they get past that 10th or 11th
I gotta tell you, as a
hour.
creative producer, it's it just gives me chills to hear this, because this is what I hear, for example, on the Showtime films. They have this average of 5,500 feet. And I'm doing a sports film and I'm shooting baseball, and that's not possible to do 5,500 feet.
Well,
so I get screamed at by the physical production side, and then when I'm done, the creative people say, well, why didn't you cover that? And why didn't the director do this? And why didn't the director cover this? And you've just got a master. And why didn't you have 3 shots of this person and 5 of that?
In all fairness, all of this is a guideline. And naturally, you have to, if you're going to be in this business, go back to the script and say, well, gee, these guys were shooting the attack of the fort, and they had 15,000 extras and 7 cameras. There's no way they're only going to shoot 5,000 feet that day. What I look for is trends. Is the director like a third over every single day, no matter if he has 1 actor, 2 actors, or 6 actors? Because if he is, then we have a problem. If we're shooting a scene that's a high school graduation, sure, we're going to shoot more film that day. But did he get through the day before on schedule when he only had 2 actors in 1 location?
On a $10 million plus film, what's your average allowance for footage?
Our average allowance for almost every movie is 5,000 feet a day.
Which is the standard in this industry, is 5,000 film a day.
Larry, what you're talking about is bad management. Let's come back to your example of the sports film. That shouldn't have been budgeted for 5,000 feet a day, and and unfortunately, a studio system in which things have a context where things tend to flatten and be the same. leads to that kind of thinking, and that's why they hire producers who know what things, instead of having somebody, just whack out a budget. Now, wait. Having made that mistake, good management would say, hey, we're shooting 7,000 feet of film. Why is that? Oh, it's a sports movie. Guess what? That's not going to change. Right. And you're going to say, well, look, we're going to be over here. We're either going to be over, which is one approach, or we're going to be over here. We've got to make an adjustment over here.
Going back to the initial budgeting process, I spend as much time in a budgeting meeting pointing out places where the budget is deficient as I do pointing out places where we can make cuts.
You made an interesting comment. You said all your films, you average 5,000.
That's where we start.
Okay, but when you're doing a 20, what I don't understand, and that is the average. Showtime does the same thing you make.
Paramount does it.
Yeah, but
Warner Brothers does it.
When you're shooting 6.5 pages a day on 5,000 feet?
I am only in the feature film department, so I don't get into 6.5 pages.
Well, I had the same argument with the studio that you did.
When they tell me they want to shoot 6.5 pages,
I had the same argument.
Under $5 million.
Why is a film that's 40 days, or let's say 35 days to make it more extreme, going to shoot that much less film to make the final situation?
It's the same 98 minutes.
And this is,
it's the same running time.
It's the same running time.
But the films are completely different. I mean, the 98 minutes is the same length, but what's in the 98 minutes is what's different.
Very different.
Yeah.
If I were directing the 35 day movie, I would try to get a lot more setups per day than if I had 55 days to do the same movie. So if I did that, follow me here, I would be shooting a lot more film per day, wouldn't I? And if you're gonna put out a product which is good, you have to have the setups, you have to have editing and so forth.
This shows you why you can't.
So, but the studio will still average 5,000 feet. And what's important is to say, well, this film is deviant for X, Y, and Z.
Well, I think that's true, but I think the situation you have with a hot sheet is to give you an average. Remember talking about moving the money around? You have an allocation of X number of feet for every film. Now, the truth is, if I sat on a movie, which I did, called Cutthroat Island, and I'd put in 1.5 million feet of film, I would have been fired. The director shot 1.5 million feet of film. So is there a reality there?
Still couldn't make it.
Well, that's a creative comment. The thing that you went into, now listen, to end this thing right now, Don, you're sitting with a hot sheet. You do not use a hot sheet on a movie?
No, because our budgets are extraordinarily detailed. In fact, to spend $600,000 or $700,000, our budget may be 70 pages long. We do a day out of days on every single element, so our hot costs are treated all as the standard run-of-the-mill costs. Everything's on a day out of days. Every single, the snorkel lens that's only going to work Tuesday, the reverse mag that's only going to work a week from Wednesday, it has its own line on the budget. Every single thing's tracked. So nothing's hot for us.
Everything has to be tracked in a smaller budgeted film because every nickel counts. So it counts for Andrew too because he's dealing with that. But in order to deal with a multitude of projects as something like Spelling would do.
Well, the snorkel lens is a higher percentage, a much higher percentage of Donald's movie than his movie.
It's true.
So it's a less important thing. I just want to say, when I did Andrew's job, one of the things I liked about the hot costs is everybody in management had to look at where we were every day. They couldn't possibly, even this one sheet thing, read it because it just gives you a headache. So they looked at the bottom thing, and so for a minute every day they were thinking about where we were on that movie and what our reaction would be. I mean, I was in a slightly different company where management were all people who had been creative producers on the line, which is, I think, comes back to something we skipped, which is different kinds of producers. But they knew what it was to make a movie. They weren't just studio executives. And so we were very reactive to whatever situation we found we were in. And many times, before the system could tell me where we were, a phone call that they had with the director gave them much more information than I had. And I mean, that's one thing I would say about computers, hot cost call sheets, production reports. Finally, you gain a tremendous amount of innate experience from doing this. And there's a thing that goes off in your head, and that thing happens faster. Donald knows that he's over before any piece of paper could ever reach his desk. And so a lot of what I did is I talked to people, and I knew and I expected them to call me.
It's so true. We don't need a hot cost to tell us we shot more than 5,000 feet. I only sent 5,000 feet out on the truck. I'm going to get a call from the set. They're running out around 3 o'clock.
And it's true. And keep in mind, though, that Donald's doing, you got like 6 pictures lined up coming up. He's doing 6 pictures. The situation with Andrew with spelling, he's doing a multitude of projects. Thing is, when you have a line producer on a project or a creative producer like Larry, what you end up with someone who's right on the line. A picture has a pattern. Within 2 weeks, you will know the pattern of your picture because you know the heartbeat of your picture.
That's when the hot costs are.
Then you're really going to know where you're in trouble. Now, questions?
We're half done by now.
You have to.
We're half
2
done.
weeks.
Don't use hot costs on short schedules.
And he's the man who talked about the Eddie Murphy comment about the perks. Okay. Yes. You have this list? That's the only thing we didn't hit. Amazing, isn't it? Larry, what kind of producers are there?
Oh, I mean.
Come on. I know. You I know you know.
Okay, on a feature film, the producer is supposedly the person who's in charge. In most cases, in most instances, that's true. In television, it's the executive producer. A line producer is the person who has the responsibility for physically making the film, coordinating all financial matters with whatever financial entity has put up the money. Unit production manager really does the same thing, sometimes on a little bit less sophisticated level, and sometimes you'll use a production manager instead of a line producer if you don't have a financial entity to whom you answer and you're a creative producer who's doing several projects. Some producers are very hands-on. They're there every day, as I am. Some are doing 3 or 4 films at the same time, and they're sitting in the office most of the time planning the next 3 or 4 they're going to do. So they need a production manager. How do I read that?
Well, you have associate producer.
Well, there's a different. I was an associate producer. I may end up being one again soon. In TV and in features, the associate producer function is very different. The associate producer function, as far as I can tell, in features, is usually somebody who was involved early on in the creative process or helped get the project sold. Might be one of the writers, somebody like that.
Somebody who loaned money.
Somebody that helped arrange financing.
Somebody who will associate with the producers.
Somebody who deserves a credit. Somebody who deserves some money and a credit just to pretty much go away. In television, the associate producer's function is post-production. He is responsible for coordinating he or she, the producer's interest in terms of business affairs. When I did the job, I got involved with press and publicity. You are the conduit between the production, post-production, and often the network. And you certainly have the editors, the sound house, and final delivery of the picture falls into your area.
And the executive producer, traditionally by definition, is the person who puts the money up. At one time back in the 70s, Dino De Laurentiis, he would put his name on as the executive producer. It was his financial package that was putting the thing together, and he'd have a producer on the film who was the creative end of the process.
Well,
but today it could be
the line producer.
It could be the line producer, could be the writer, could be an actor.
It's very gray. It could be a cousin.
It could be a
cousin.
Right?
I've had cousins
Right.
with me who, not my cousin, but
could be a manager.
Could be a manager.
Of the lead actor. There are a lot of functions. I think it's not really useful to talk about it in titles. I mean, that's a very complex thing. And while the people on the panel probably can sort out, in many cases, who did what on a movie just by reading the credits, that has to do with sort of knowing who they are and what they likely did. But even in producers for hires, there are people who you would nominally categorize as line producers or producers for hire. There's some that are known because they're really good with talent, what we sometimes in slang call handholders. There are people that are hired because they're really good at making a cheap movie. There are people that are hired and have an expertise because they can launch a complicated movie in a short period of time. There are people who come as line producers because they have a relationship with the director. There are producers, there's a packaging function, which is why the manager of the lead actor is often a producer.
There's a variety
Development function.
of titles.
Even in creative producers, there are development creative producers, there are packaging creative producers. So what I would hope that all of you would try to be is what Donald is, which is a producer. Larry is.
Larry,
all of the functions.
Larry and
of
Donald
the
do it
producer.
all from scratch. I essentially work usually for major studios, and Andrew basically is running part of a major studio. And someone hires us.
I spent 2 years at a company largely doing what Andrew did because I wanted to learn development so I could fill out my game, not just be a shot blocker, if you will, but also be a shooter. And I think that's a laudable, even if you don't function, as Larry says, as a line producer. How, if you are responsible for the project, can you supervise that person if you don't know that stuff that they do? And it was Alfred Hitchcock who said about the director that you need to know more about what everybody on your show does than they do.
That's true.
And I think that's producing, you really need to be multidimensional, even if you don't use that on every project.
You talked about the use of computers primarily in the front-end planning process with scheduling and budgeting and sort of breaking down. What do you see the role currently in the future as far as really supporting the whole production process, scheduling?
Scheduling is a preparatory end. You change, and then you change it.
The whole accounting function of a picture is all done by computer now. So that, when I get into that hot cost report and I have a particular area that I'm concerned with, I can call the production accountant and say, what's going on in this particular department? And it's on my desk in 5 minutes. How do you want to see it? You want to see it by hours? You want to see it by personnel? You want to see it by materials? So that is an ongoing function. Production reports, all that stuff is now loaded into the computer and updated, and
Every piece of paper on a movie
comes out of a computer.
It does.
we ran a typewriter, but it's mostly for filling out forms.
Right.
There is a program now for call sheets and production reports. I bought it once at a discount. I wouldn't buy it now because it works okay the way it is. And eventually there will be something like the scheduling program that everybody uses.
Right now, the standard is to save the human resource of time by the word processing features, the fact that it can retain the information, just make a couple of changes and print it out quickly. The other products that they have available that are being tested, from our company's point of view, we're looking to manufacture X amount of setups. That's what it's all about to us. So if we need to have 720 setups to cut our movie, it's a big difference if we're going to do a 30-day shoot or a 40-day shoot. It's setups per day is what's getting us out, and that's what's saying how long our schedule is. The amount of time it takes us to play with the new toys keeps cutting into setups. So you can take they have technology right now where they can split the optic in the lens. They can run that right through a video tap and record it right on set with the script supervisor script laid down right over it. So you on the set can say things, let's recall the take from yesterday to check our continuity. It's just cheaper and faster to have the script person there doing it.
Ralph's got it. He can't afford it.
Yeah.
He can't afford the time to use it.
Ralph can't afford it either.
Ralph can't afford it either, but he does.
No,
But
it makes your shooting day long.
It takes your setups down. You lose the film itself for the sake of
The video replay situation is the kiss of death in some respects, because suddenly you create something on a feature called Video Village. The director is no longer on the set with the actors. He or she is in front of the video monitor. I mean, I'm very prejudiced on
Like
this
a
one.
commercial.
I like the idea of a ability for a actor who is directing the project to have it, because they can see their own performance. The idea of dealing with animals, dealing with special effects, dealing with stunts, great. Beyond that, it's a kiss of death.
I loved hearing the Waterworld stories about how Kevin Costner would show up to work, and the first thing he'd do, they're trying to get their shots done, to say, let's see all the stunts from yesterday.
And the operation would stop, and they would do that. So the truth is, it's good and it's bad.
What we try to do is discourage playback. We encourage a video tap on the camera so that as the shot is going down, the director, the producers, whoever's on the set is actually seeing something on a screen. But there's no 3/4-inch of VHS machine attached.
One thing I want to say about technology. Some very fine movies that you all liked were made with Mitchell cameras where you couldn't even see what you were actually getting. They didn't have walkie-talkies. They used semaphore flags for the battlefield.
And cut on synchronizers.
They didn't have flatbeds, much less avids. They cut on synchronizers and then later a moviola. So particularly those of you which usually is the case in this kind of body who are interested in making lower budgeted movies. You don't need all these toys, and once you get to be doing this professionally, the way that Donald is, you've got to really evaluate if the cost factor of the toy is really going to yield you something, or whether you've just got to dispense with it and do something.
For instance, we won't let cell phones on our set.
Can't afford them.
And they're always lining up their next job instead of worrying about the next shot. And I got to pay for it.
Okay, question?
Do you have some rules
I wanna go to work.
about, for instance, in the post-production, about the number of people who can go in there now that there's Avid, and the editors that I've talked to, now that it's gone to computer, you get more people wanting to have their say, and, oh, we can do it 45 minutes.
Well, I have my own special theory about it. Electronic editing for me is far more crucial in television than it is in feature filmmaking. Especially in series TV, where there'll be 3 directors to direct all 13 episodes, so that the director, any one of those directors, is prepping, shooting, and posting a half hour or hour at the same time. Electronic editing allows the director and the producers and the network to go in and make changes and see them right away, which is great for TV because it's formula. When you get into feature films, I think that electronic editing encourages directors not to prepare what their movie's going to look like in the end. It becomes trial and error. Gee, let's see if the close-up works before the master or after the master. Well, if you ever thought about that, at least in some kind of a global fashion, way back in pre-production. Listen, we're just finishing up a Sidney Lumet film now. We're about to release it. Mr. Lumet cut this picture on a flatbed. He went to dailies on film. This is a guy who had his 5,000 feet a day, and if he shot 3, we were lucky. Because he had planned every single shot and rehearsed every single shot long before they ever got to location. So when you look at this movie, you should read his book, by the way, but when you looked at his dailies, I could have cut them together. You cut the slates off the head and the flash off the end, you slam them together, and that's the scene.
That's why these
But see,
we have, when we get into the budgeting process and we start to think about how the movie's going to be made, we evaluate the schedule in terms of whether Here's what I would like to see start to happen is I would like to see a movie cut on film up to the point that the director delivers his cut. And when the minions start to have their opinions and the test audiences start to turn in cards, one of the things that I'm starting to encourage at Spelling is to then bring in an AVIC. Load the editor's assembly and the director's cut, which is basically all the usable footage from the movie, and the last cut. So now you got all that stuff in there. Now we can start fiddling around, and we can see it in a matter of days. The real trap to electronic editing is when the schedule goes longer than the budget, because it's more expensive.
Well, it's a tool that's supposed to shorten the schedule.
And it doesn't. Once you get beyond your 18 weeks, 20 weeks, 22 weeks,
and
it's much more expensive.
There's 2 very good reasons why it doesn't shorten the schedule. One, work expands to fill available time. So you're doing more work, but you're not necessarily doing productive work. This isn't always true. And the other thing is, work always expands to the size of the committee. And I mean, everybody knows that from life.
it's too available.
How different our context is, because on the low budget, the computer editing process has saved us everything. Now, instead of having to have the better part of 2 human beings that do nothing but reconstitute celluloid, the computer doesn't need it. It's just instant. We've taken our post department on film. We couldn't run post without 3 people. An editor cutting, an assistant attending to it, an apprentice reconstituting all day. Now we run the shop with 1 person, and they're also the post supervisor.
But you're it.
Let in there.
Yes.
Don't let a group come in.
It's all we pay to go in there. And then when they're done with the cut, the thing that's beautiful is when you used to show, let's say that the director and the producer believe in the cut. And I turned in a film once to a studio that recut our movie only because an executive had the right to do it, and it was a very heartbreaking experience. We all worked very hard on the film. We would have had to invest in our own money, $2,000 approximately, to take a fluoroscope copy of that film to protect our own cut. That's the most beautiful thing about linear editing. You just, okay, was it a better idea? This. It's great.
And the advantage he has, too, is that he's approached it the way Andrew's talking about as far as television, because you're dealing with such a small amount of money that you have to have maximum control. Question? Yes.
What's the average post on, like, if it was
The first thing you're going to need is if you're a director's guild, your director gets a period of time contractually, and on a major feature, it's typically 10 weeks. That's their period. Then you're going to need a time to lock the picture, do music and effects, mix it, and deliver it.
So let's say
On ours, 12 to 14 weeks.
But, you know,
If it's 15, if it's 30 days, about the same.
it all depends on how you use the tools, and as I said before in the context, this is a really good tool, but it has been used in a way which doesn't do what it wants in many of these bigger contexts. A gun is a useful tool, but it's also not a very useful tool.
Well, the situation you have there is this: be it electronic editing or be video on a set, it can be helpful, it can be very hindering. Question right there, yes.
How about the pre-production? How do you determine how much time you spend on pre-production and setting up a pre-production?
As much as you can get.
The more pre-production you have, the cheaper your picture is going to be.
That's a financial decision.
It also...
That goes to budget for the most part.
Yeah.
As a creative producer, I can tell you I have exactly always the same answer that Don just gave. The more I can get, the more I'll take. I don't care if it's a 20-day shoot or a 100-day shoot.
And you can do creative
I want
deals.
the most I can get.
You can say to somebody like a designer, you know, I'm shooting in 12 weeks. I can only afford to hire you for 6 weeks. So what we do is say things like, so can I hire you full-time for 5 weeks? And can I pay you for that first 6th week on a flat, non-exclusive basis and talk to you for the next 7 weeks? And you're really getting your 12 weeks of prep in for the same price. So as much as you can get, you can make the
More
number
and
work.
more on studio films, there's less and less prep, and I'll give you an example. Are people mostly familiar with this situation of the film The Double that had John Travolta in it, where he left the movie and the movie's postponed? Well, he's doing a movie announced, I think, Friday or Thursday that's shooting like the second week in August, which is about 5 or 6 weeks from now. Well, why is that? Well, that's because his availability is driving that, and sometimes release dates will drive how long the pre-production and the post-production is. It's much like what we talked about the budget. Ralph can figure out abstractly what something should cost, but if that number is 30 million and they've raised 22 million, that's not going to fly. Similarly, you don't really get to decide what the prep is, if there's release date or if there's star availability, and also the post isn't as long as possible in that case.
Yes.
Yeah, this is for Donald. First of all, how many films do you do a year? And secondly, when you're doing for the smaller budget, I'm talking about 600, 700,000, how do you get the marquee value actors, I mean, you know, to be in those films?
We do 4 pictures a year, and that's how we know which films to greenlight. We listen to the agents, and we find out which actor... See, the funny thing about an agent contract, let me first say, the wisdom I can ever give to you is, a deal is a good deal if it's good for both sides of the deal. So we approach it backwards. We say, why is it ever going to be good for an actor to do one of our little movies? 2 pictures with Corey Feldman. As soon as he announced that he was recovering from heroin, we said, good, prove it by us. 3 pictures with Drew Barrymore. As soon as she announced she was recovering from heroin, we said, good, do them with us.
Heroin.
Yeah. You know,
Specialist.
We got a halfway house.
It's called a halfway house.
an agent called us up one day and said, Joan Severance really wants to do a picture with Donna Deitch. So we hired Donna Deitch to direct a movie for us. Then we got Joan Severance. Very often an agent contract will say that if their client has not been brought an offer within a 90-day window, the client can cancel the contract and leave the agency. So an agent will call us up because we can move on a dime. We don't have any bureaucracy. We can make the offer in the phone call. They'll call us up and say, I'm losing the client. I say, okay, how much do I need to close the deal? I'll close it with you right now. And then we'll greenlight a picture based on that.
That's great. Yes.
And also another project is inheritance. I mean, aren't they budgetable assistance? In other words,
They're helpful because we talked about elements to make a project happen, but there are no guarantees. There are absolutely no guarantees at all. Any comment? Ben?
Depends on the project and how good it is.
Yes.
On a studio finance film? 100%.
I do.
100%. They can fire the producer, they can fire the director, They can fire anybody they want to fire.
It's their money. It's their
In
money.
theory. In theory.
It's
I
their
think
money.
leverage is a better term than control. Once the ship has sailed away from the dock and you've started to spend money, it's harder to control the movie.
It's a situation they talk about getting a studio pregnant.
I was just going to.
Because what happens is, as the movie continues on, they get deeper and deeper and deeper. They suddenly find themselves with a $9 million pay play on an actor. They have now spent another $600,000 on a screenplay. They suddenly have to look at their costs. And a picture I did a year or two ago, the particular studio in mind, $7 million to walk away. Was it a smart thing for them to do? The smartest thing they could have done. This picture was never close to being ready, both in the screenplay.
Well, replacing directors, for example, is a very bold move. I mean, it's a large move. It's a very expensive move because you have to shut down typically and start again. And if you're going to replace the director, you're probably not very happy with the picture anyway. Why are you going to spend a couple more $1 million? You have to pay both directors. So, it's a theory, Larry is right, but in practice, a lot of that power is given up for various reasons.